So I've ordered a rear end for the back of my 1969 Mustang, and this video is going to be how I made it fit in the back of the car. Well, what this is a Ford 9-inch rear end, and this is the housing that I'm going to put behind my drivetrain package. This is a unit that came from Speedway Motors. It came with some axles also. I bought it all separate. They're cut to length axles, and this is a 60-inch housing. So I need to measure what my offset's going to be, or my space between the back wheels, and that'll let me know how much I need to cut out of this and remove. If you're looking at this thinking it looks a little different than a factory housing, you're right. This is a little more reinforced. It's pretty cool what they do here. They put these extra plates here, but this is just more reinforcement. Typically the tubes come in a lot farther. This gives you more leverage against that force that gets applied to these 3-inch tubes. And as far as the bearings on the end, these are the large Ford bearings. Okay, so before I can cut anything, I need to know where the car is going to sit and how wide the axle needs to be. And I do that by putting the car at approximate ride height and tucking the tires under it. And with the tires where they need to be and my ride height set, I can make sure I have the travel. So for travel, the car is going to squat up to 4 inches, and that's what you see here. I've basically brought the back end of the car down 4 inches to simulate the car squatting, and then double check to make sure I had tire clearance on my inner fender wells. With that where it needs to be, the wheels are chalked, car comes up, and I can draw the measurement of what my flange to flange axle measurement is going to be. Okay, so now that I know the width of what I need for my axles, which is 58.5 inches, I can get into narrowing down this existing housing. So when it comes to narrowing a rear end, there's certain things that you have to have, or you have to do it right. This is actually a kit from Miller Brothers, and it's a true heavy solid bar that goes through to make sure that the housings are aligned correctly. And then there's also end pieces. Now I've got them for different sized axles, but these will slide in and they're machine fit, so they're real snug. And that will just make sure that after I cut this and reattach it, everything is true. A lot of measurements on the rear end are going to come off of the center of the pinion, that pinion gear. So for that, there's this gauge, right? And how that works is I'll line it up with the holes that say F for Ford, and that's going to show me where the midline is going to be for my pinion, and I can draw my measurements from there. 4 stick outs, so when you order axles, depending on the brake kit, you can get axles that have different distances from the flange to the flange of where your mounting wheel is. So there's going to be some math involved in this. These ones I ordered are 2.5. So when I do my math, all of that's going to factor in. Essentially, I'll have to factor the 2.5 inches on each side, or the 5 inches out of my 58.5 inches. And while I'm doing my measurements, I need to make sure I know where these axle brackets are going to land. The last thing I want to do is cut this down and weld it right in the way of where this bracket lands on the housing. So I'll measure that out as well. I could have edited it out, but I like to put this kind of stuff in it. One of them went really good. The second one, it's always the second one, went really good. The first one, that parting tool grabbed real hard and it kicked the part out of the lathe and chewed it up pretty good. Nothing too deep. I can fix that with a little bit of sandpaper, and the part of the bearing that rides on that won't care. It's just pressed in there. Alright, so with my crab claw here, you can see that I've placed my ends on just to check the bevel, make sure that I've got a decent relief, and to make sure the rod will make it through and there's no issues. And I placed these brackets here just because I have PTSD from forgetting brake line fittings in the past. I don't want to get anything welded on this without these being in place. Now, it's not enough to make sure that the end caps are true to each other. I need to make sure that the center section is in line with those axles. And the way we do this is by using this third member here. You're going to see I strip it down, and I have some jigs that go in where the bearings typically would, just to make sure that the axle inserts and those end caps are all laser straight and in the same line. So I've torn down my Speedway center section, and I've counted the turns just to give me a starting point when I put everything back for the adjusters here. But I'm a little disappointed with the quality that I found when I pulled this. So under the bearings there was a bunch of material still there, and then you can see on the threads what the material is. It's actually from when they sandblasted it. All of the media never got cleaned very good. But I'll clean that out before I put this back together. Alright, so where I'm at now, I've got a couple of tacks just holding, well, one tack just holding this end on so I can adjust it where I need to. Same with the other side. And I've got my inserts in on the center section. I've stripped the gear out, and I've got my center machined parts in here. I do not have the correct studs to hold this, so for now I'm just going to use a couple of taped bolts just to get this started. Ooh, and I do have the gasket here, which needs to go on as well. That'll give me the correct space that I need on this thing. So how this is going to work, I'm going to put the center section in, and then I'll feed the rod through the end caps and ensure that I've got everything proper in the center, and then the ends here will line everything up for me so I can tack it and weld it. With the third member installed and the gasket and everything set up, I came to the realization here that this isn't lining up quite the way I wanted it to. Now, hindsight's 20/20. When I made these initial cuts, I should have made them as tight as I could to that outside flange because I could have hid this. I could have welded it and nobody would ever notice, but because of where it is, it's pretty in your face that this is off. Now, removing the gasket from the third member helped a little in one direction, but this front direction you see here, it didn't do anything for it. The third member is already as far forward and down as it can go on the bolts. There's really not a lot of wiggle room. So what I have to do is find a way to deflect this tube or bend this tube and get it more aligned in some fashion. Now, in my mind, the simplest way to do this would be using some clamps on my table. These generate a lot of force, a lot of leverage, and seeing if I can just manhandle this thing and really bend it and tweak it as far as I can. If I take it past, when I release it, it should put me right where I need to be. Well, myth busted. I clamped it, I sprung it past where it needed to be, and when I released it, the thing came right back to where it was. So, on to plan B. Plan B is going to be adding a lot of heat to one side of the tube. If I weld these brackets on this side real heavy, I'm hoping that it will draw the tube. And I've done this unintentionally on things I've welded in the past. But if I do this in a controlled method, I think I can draw this tube to where it needs to be. Earlier I made the marks on where these brackets need to go, so we know how far out they need to be. Now I need to orient them for rotation. Now I have an angle finder. I could have done this with a square, but I find this to be an easier way. I've shimmed up the front of the third member, and I have my housing right at 90 degrees. Angle finder tells me it's perpendicular to the table. Now I can simply rotate this bracket so it too reads 90 degrees, and that'll let me know that it's right in spec with what the drawings want. Those brackets are parallel to the face of the housing. Okay, so I've got everything tacked up and it's all looking perfect on the angle finder here. You can see that 89.9 is my target and I am right there, dead on. And again on this one without the magnet, you can see it's 89.9. So now for the rear bracket, for the panhard bar, the drawing shows that I'm 90 degrees on this face here. That's this one. And I've got that pretty close. Depending on where I set it on this, it switches around because there's a little rock to this plate, but I'm within the 89.9. The only thing I don't like about this is the picture it shows in here on the next page is actually, it looks like it kind of wraps around so that this part sits on the inside. That's not an option on this. There's just no cut into it for that to happen. So aside from notching this out or cutting this in, I don't think that would happen. So it's not gonna get it. I'll weld it all the way around. I'll weld the inside, the top, this side as well. I'm sure it'll be plenty strong that way. I'm ready to burn them in. Like we talked about, I wanna draw this tube up. And same on this side. I'm running into the same thing. I need this to come that direction. So I don't do this real often. What I'm gonna do is call my father. He's a bit of an expert on this stuff and pick his brain. You're never too old to call for help, right?
Hello?
Hey, what you doing?
At the car show, talking to a gentleman about redoing a 460 for him. What are you doing?
Oh, nice. Hey, I'm welding up that rear end real quick. I won't keep you long. The welds, the direction I put the most heat is the way that pipe's going to pull, correct?
The most heat is the way it's going to pull. So if you want it to pull forward, you weld the front side okay, on both sides of the bracket. That'll help pull that tube forward and weld it one side on the back of it.
Alrighty, that's what I'll do then. I'll inside and outside it and try to draw it that way. That's it. I'll let you get back to the car show. I appreciate it, Dad.
Okay, I'll check on you later.
All right, I love you. Bye. All right, so there you have it. The expert says we're going to lay a lot of heat, weld inside and outside right here, and we'll see what it does in the time lapse, if it brings that up or not. Oh man, I love science. So let me pull the pressure off of it. Here we go. So what I'm left with, you can see it right there in the video. It certainly drew real hard, and I put a couple of tacks, but you can see that this is nice and free. I can turn my turn bar, but my gap has completely closed up. That was spot on. So looks much better. Let's check the other side here, hopefully. Oh yeah, so it's a hair off. I'm talking less than a 1/16 on that, which I'm pretty happy with. Way better than the giant gap that I had before. That is right there. I'm gonna let this cool down all of the way just to make sure before I burn this in all the way. But man, that's a big difference.
Now once everything was cool, I could get to welding on these end caps. And you saw there I slipped it off and I put a protective sleeve out over top of my jig. And what this does, it just keeps the splatter off of the tube. This is a trick my father told me about. He's done a number of these, so he's got a lot of the cool tricks of the trades. And you'll see here I jump around, right? I don't want the heat to do any more distorting of that tube. We've got it where we want it. So from here on, I was even with my welds. I distributed them in different areas. That way if there was any pull, it counteracted itself and everything stayed right where I wanted it to stay.
Well, everything's fully welded all the way around, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. Everything has cooled now to the touch, and my bar is still nice and free. I can move it around in there. I need to put on some of the other brackets now on this housing. I noticed when I was setting this up that on these Heims joints I was missing lock nuts. They gave me the tough ones to find, the left-handed ones, and these will be for the bars that go, there we go, the bars that go down like this. But in the kit I'm missing the traditional right-hand nuts. I was gonna reach out. TCI is an awesome company. They've been super receptive, and I was gonna see if I could get the right missing parts. But then I noticed these brackets I'm about to put on, when you mock it up, there's bolts, but there's also 2 nuts in there, and they are the exact ones that I'm missing. So wasn't missing them. It's just later on in the steps after I do this, I'll use these recycled. It came with this jig, and in the instructions it shows assembling it, which I'm gonna do here in a second. And then also I've got the brackets that go on the bottom here, and that'll be for the 3-link. So now that everything's cooled, you'll see me pull this tube out, and I can assemble the rest of those brackets for the 3rd link, or for the torque arm, onto the housing. I'm getting close. I've got a couple more pieces to put on this housing. You can see I've got the brackets on. I've got my backlash set and my ring gear back in my rear end here, which is covered up trying to protect it. I need to put the brackets on the top and on the bottom here, and my sway bar. So I'll walk you through these. It comes with, and you'll see it on the next page here, it comes with this attachment and this throwaway fixture plate, which is super convenient. I'm glad that they did this. This just mounts up on the top here. I can use the existing holes right there. A little adjusting, but aha, there we go. And it'll place me right where I need to be with these once everything's bolted up. I did run into an issue. I'm using a hard-edged fabbed rear end. I had to notch and clearance this radius out, that way that these would mount in there the way they're supposed to go. I've also got to put the sway bar tabs in there. So these are going to land right back on our center line, and they are perpendicular to this face here, and they're arching up if you're going towards the front of the car. So they'll get welded on right like that, and again, right off my center line. And there's one thing that's not in the instructions, and it's the attachment for the torque arm. So it's hiding in the back there, that big torque arm. I do have this jig though, so I imagine it's pretty self-explanatory. Common sense would say this attaches, right? And then these tabs will be located on the bottom. So I'm not gonna be able to do it on the camera, but I double checked it with right here. What it's showing is the center of the pinion. Once I find the center of the pinion, these tabs are just off of it. And it makes sense when you're delivering power from the drive shaft coming through that pinion right there. We want this torque arm to be directly underneath of that, so it distributes the power evenly to the car and it doesn't try to launch it or cattywampus that rear end in any way. So again, this will line up. I'll put it right to those tabs, and I'll tack all this together, and you'll watch it in the time lapse. I'll get it all together. It'll happen a lot faster for you than it does for me. Onto the axles. So we talked about these earlier. These are the cut to fit axles from Speedway also. And there's different methods for cutting these down, but it's important to note they're hardened, and if you use a bandsaw, it's going to waste your blade. Tonight I powder coated the rest of the rear suspension, so I threw the housing in the mix. This color you see is blackjack. It's kind of a matte black, but this will be the final color. My bolts came in for the housing to mount that third member, and I wanted to include a little shot of this. Installing these, I just did it the old-fashioned way. I found a couple of washers I could stack up, and I cranked this thing down with a ratchet until they all pulled tight. Rinse and repeat. You got 10 of them to do. After all 10 were set, I could start cutting down the axles. Now the best way to cut an axle, I think, is a chop saw, but I got rid of mine a little while back because that's really all I use it for. This will work in a pinch. I was able to use a cutoff wheel. It just takes a lot longer and some patience, and I cut the two axles down that way, just a little bit at a time with this wheel, working it side to side all the way around. Well, with a little bit of work, both of the axles are cut down and cleaned up. I've got a real nice edge on it just so it can slip in, and I've test fit these and they fit just right. I'll show you here. I don't know if I can do it one-handed, but I'm gonna try. Let's do this, I'll fix the camera. Alright. So as you see, it's nice and snug, and both of them fit really good, but I've learned something just now playing with this. For my Wilwood brakes, I bought a kit that was on clearance at Summit, and these are actually front ones, but I'm gonna make them work, right? So they've got the hats, and then they'll have the rotors that bolt on behind it, and I've picked up some brackets that'll work with it. I had to buy these separate, but essentially these will bolt on from the backside. The axle itself sticks out a little bit farther, and looking at the back of my wheel here, it's not going to fit. So this opening here, it came with these little hub inserts, is exactly this diameter of this part here, which means when I try to place that wheel up on this axle, it's going to hit right here. It's not going to clear. So it's never easy, right? I can put a spacer on it. I could space this whole thing out so that this comes out that 1/4 of an inch, and I wouldn't have that problem. It would mount face flush here. But I'd really like to use that hub-centric center to help center the wheel. So what I'll do is, or at least right now what the plan is, I'm going to pull those axles out and I will put them in the lathe and essentially take this down to what the wheel is, so that it is stepped for the rotor and then the axle is stepped for the wheel itself. That feels like the appropriate compromise for this. Before I could cut this axle down in the lathe, I needed to grab a couple of measurements, and the big one was the diameter that I needed the axle to be, and that's going to be on this face here, and then also how far in the wheel was. And I took those two measurements, chucked up the axle, and was able to cut it down. Here's a shot. I just did a little bit at a time, checking my measurements as I went, until eventually I had it just right. The cut's complete. Hopefully that shows it's a mirror finish. Moment of truth. Okay, so the rotor fits perfect. It's a nice snug fit. We knew that from before, and you can see that my step down now is actually in front of it. Now the important thing is that this matches the profile here of, I've got my better calipers out here, 275 thousandths. My other one was a little off. We land here at 274 thousandths, so it's within 1 thousandths, or 1/3 of a piece of paper. I think we can live with that. And if you look here, this is that hub-centric spacer, and it's spot on. So that's perfect. Now I can do the other one. Axle's wrapped up. I could dress up my center section a little bit. And before mounting this, I wanted to put it in color, so I degreased it and hit it with this Rust-Oleum. This is just a traditional red. I think it gives it kind of a race feel and reminds me of some of the nostalgic look of the red on black. I wanted to use my gasket because I paid money for it, but sometimes that's the way it goes, right? If it didn't work, it didn't work. So to seal this thing up, I've got some Right Stuff here. Maddie gave me some company while I prepped it and got the third member ready to drop in. And if it looks like I'm struggling a little bit here, it's probably because I am. This sucker's heavy, and picking it up high to get it over the table and pulling it in and out, I was definitely glad that this was the last time.
All right, there it is, all wrapped up. It was a lot of work, but I'm so happy with the way this turned out. And if you want to see how it looks in the car, you can check out that next video where I'll be installing the 3-link suspension and all of the TCI rear. Thanks for watching. What's that?
What are you doing to the car?
I had to borrow your tape measure, but I put it back, okay? You want to see what I did?